Oh, it's great to have you. Please give us a brief bio on yourself, Wes.
I'm 45 years old. Been hunting and fishing most of my life. I spent most of my years in the woods from the time I was probably 5. I'm a family man. I got a wife and 10 kids. And that's probably about it.
Well, that's more than enough to keep a guy busy. Wes, if you could tell us about your experience in the outdoors, it's pretty common when someone comes back and talks about a dogman that they saw, where you'll have someone claim that they just mistook it for a bear, for a wolf that was on its hind legs because this person didn't know the way around the woods. That's not the case with you. Could you please explain your background out there and whatnot?
Well, I'm a real serious hunter, real serious about deer hunting. When I go out there, I'm going out there to do business. I'll get in the tree stand at 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning and stay there till it's dark all day long. I've seen bear, I've seen coyotes, I've seen everything that there is to see out here in Pennsylvania in the woods. What I saw was totally different. I'm starting to get nervous. Think about it, it kind of scares me a little bit just thinking about seeing it again. Yeah, I have outdoor experience, and I've seen a lot of animals out there, and I've hunted other states. I've hunted Ohio, hunted Illinois, and never have I come across a beast like this before in my life. I'm just glad that I didn't have it come up on me like a lot of people I've heard saw it on foot. I was in a vehicle when I saw it.
Well, thank goodness you didn't see it before that encounter and you haven't seen it since. I hope that was your first and last time having to deal with one of these things.
Yeah, I got my fingers crossed that I don't see this thing again. It was pretty traumatic experience. I drove off and left. It didn't leave me. I left it.
Let's jump right into the details of this encounter. If you could tell us what led you to being in that area where you had that encounter.
Well, I've been staying down here at my mother's place, helping take care of her, and my wife's father's been really sick, so she's helping her father, so I'm staying down here, and I actually have a house in the mountains where you would expect something like this to be, is up there in the middle of nowhere, but we're out here in the suburbs down here, and so I got up around 1:30 and had my stuff packed. I was heading up north to go turkey hunting with my boys. I believe it was the second week in May. I left here and I started getting out into the horse country, and that's what led up to the encounter.
So you had headed out, you thought it was going to be like any other day. It goes without saying, if you had a clue what you were going to be running into later that day, you wouldn't have left the house. I don't think anyone could blame you. But
I wouldn't have went that way for sure.
Yeah, I can't say I'll blame you. So you're heading down the road, and then what happened?
I was going down the road, and as I approached over this little hump in the road, it flattened off and kind of went downhill, and I saw eyes, and I saw an animal walking toward the road coming from a stand of pines. As I got up closer, I thought, well, maybe this is a deer. I thought it was a deer. So I started hitting the brakes to slow down. I didn't want to hit the deer, because there's always deer crossing the road in this area. The more I started this, so I slowed the car down, and it started coming into focus, what I was seeing. I put more pressure on the brakes. I slowed down, and I stopped. By the time I had stopped, I was right even with it, and it was right there. 15 to 20 feet off of the road. It looked at me, and I looked at it, and we locked eyes, and then I realized that this was something that I'd never seen before. Just looking at me, it kind of just shook me, it like looked right through me, and it was big, and it was probably 4.5 feet long from its nose to its stem without the tail on it. The tail was kind of puffed out a little, bushed out, going down on an angle, and it really spooked me.
I don't think anyone could blame you for being spooked by seeing something like that. So that I understand, Did you say this was early in the morning, if I remember correctly?
Yes, this was 1:40 a.m. in the morning.
1:40 a.m.
Yeah, I left real early that morning to be up north. It takes me 2 hours to get up there to go turkey hunting, to be there by 4, so I usually leave around 1:30, 2 o'clock-ish to get up there early enough.
So if it's that early in the morning, the only light source that you're going to have to take a look at this thing with is going to be your headlights. When it was off to the side of the road like that, how much splash from the lighting on your vehicle was hitting this thing? If it's 15, 20 feet off the side of the road, I could see how, depending on the angle of the vehicle, how it might be pretty hard to make out details.
Well, there was a slight turn right there. The way the road was shaped, he was right in my right headlight. I mean, smack dead in the center of my right headlight, because the road bared to the left right there. There's a sharp curve and kind of a slight drainage ditch that goes across the road there. So it was just enough to turn. When I was on him, he was dead smack center of that right headlight. I got a pretty good look at him, and he got a pretty good look at me.
It sounds like it. If he was smack dab in the middle of that right headlight like that, then I can only imagine the details that you picked up.
He became angry that I was there for sure. I'd never seen an animal do that before. That's what really made me scared of it, was the size of it, the size of its legs. Its head was the first thing I noticed. That was this huge, real long, big, massive head on it. It had massive legs, big, fat, massive legs. I mean, it was a big animal. The way it looked at me scared me. Once I got on it and was stopped and it started to turn its head, I'm looking at it. We locked eyes, and that's when it laid its ears down and showed its teeth. Me being a hunter and seeing animals and being around dogs, I've been raised around dogs my whole life. I've never seen an animal do that just by a car being there. Usually they'll flee from a car or do anything but act like that about it. And this thing got aggressive because I was looking at it.
So you were heading down the road, Wes. When you came around that slight bend, as you were rolling up on it, you thought it was a deer initially. As you're rolling to a stop, that went out the window when you realized that it wasn't a deer. It was actually something you had never seen before. You've got it right in the middle of your right headlight, so you've got a perfect view of what you're looking at because it's only about 15 to 20 feet away. At first, it was looking away from you, but you say it turned towards you, and after it turned towards you, that's when its demeanor changed. You said it laid its ears back, it bared its teeth at you. When it did that, did you hear it make any sound?
I didn't hear a sound. I did still have my radio up a little bit. I was listening to the radio, but I didn't hear a growl or anything like that. It wasn't looking away from me. It was going straight even parallel with me. And then it turned its head and cocked, and that's when it looked at me, and that's when it bared its teeth. It lowered its ears and raised its lip at the same time. It's like you were like a dog if you were going to beat it or something and it was mad at you, or, what a dog was going to get you. That's what it did.
Ew.
That's what I said.
That sounds like a Charmin moment to me.
It didn't sound me. It just laid its head back and caught him like that, just like bared out. And I was like, man, I don't like this at all. And it kind of took a step and cocked lower to the ground in the front. I was like, and I just panicked and took off. Because I didn't know what it was going to do, I didn't want to hit it. It kind of turned towards the vehicle a little bit. And that's when I just left. I just stomped her and went.
Yeah, you handled that the best way that it could have been handled. Tell me about its eyes. What can you tell us about the way the eyes looked?
The eyes were big amber eyes. Really big, and they were almost like an owl's eye, the way the owl's eye looks. And they were it's kind of hard and weird to explain, but they were sit back in over the skull. You could see the outline of the head or the fur, like the skull plate. They were in back underneath a little bit, like tucked in just a little bit. I mean, kind of wolfish. The best way to describe it, I think, is that it looked kind of like a wolf crossed with a bear. That's kind of the best description I can give. It had the mass, the big legs, the thickness, was a wolf or a dog or whatever kind of head. You know, it's wolf-like, but dog-like. It's like a mixture of a wolf and a dog head. It's a pretty scary thing to be seeing at that a.m. in the morning. I know that.
Yeah, sounds like it was quite the specimen. How big was its head, if you had to estimate?
The length of its head?
Yeah, the length.
I'd say probably around an easy foot long, 15 inches, somewhere between there. I mean, from nose to back of the skull, it had a pretty long snout on it. I mean, the snout was a little longer than a bear. So I would say, you know, a foot, a little over a foot maybe.
That is a pretty big skull right there. As far as other proportions go, you said you thought it was about 4.5 feet from butt to the tip of its nose. What leads you to believe that it was about 4.5 feet from butt to nose?
Well, there was a pine tree, a smaller pine tree, and it was pretty much right in front of that pine tree. So I actually went back there and I measured from the fluff of that pine tree's width, from the front of that, roughly where he was standing, and I measured that width, and that width was 4 foot 6 inches roughly. So that's how I come up with that. Now, it could be a hair smaller, could be a hair bigger, but that's the ballpark.
I'm impressed how you came up with that reasoning. That's really good. In the pre-interview, you thought that its height might have been around 7 feet or so, but I have to disagree with that because I run about 6'3". I'm not 4 feet from my butt to the top of my head. I'm probably coming in closer to maybe 3 feet from my butt to the top of my head. If it was running 4.5 feet, I'd be surprised if it was any less than 8 feet tall.
Well, like I say, I've never seen one before, and I don't know how long their legs actually are when they stand. I actually think if it's walking upright and it's got those hocked legs, I think the heights can vary because of the hock. And if it hunches down a little bit, it can look a good bit shorter than if it stands straight up. So I think you're probably right. It probably was bigger than what I initially thought it was.
You make some really good points. I'll bet you're spot on. What color was its coat?
Its coat was like a dark smokish gray. It kind of had a little bit of dew on it, you know. It had that little sparkle, but it was a dark smoke gray color. The thing I remember about the head is the way it kind of came up and it bridged up and then kind of flattened off as it went over into the ears and the bottoms of the ears. I mean, my mom raises Doberman pinschers, and the base of its ear was just almost identical to a Doberman pinscher, but wider, like way wider at the the very bottom where it comes out of the head was wide, and its ear dropped up and had tufts of hair on, big tufts of hair coming off. It was a really freaky looking thing, man. And the teeth were big. I saw them pretty good. I wouldn't want it latching on to me.
Yeah, that is a really scary thought. The idea that they can grab you with their hands and then bite, it doesn't get any worse than that.
Well, I'll tell you one thing. I didn't see hands because of the height of the grass and the briefness of the encounter. If that thing would have stood up and had hands, I'd have had a stroke right there on the spot probably. I mean, it would have just blew my socks right off. I mean, that would have been it. Might have been off to the funny farm or something. But, it scared me bad enough being on all fours. I can't imagine somebody coming up on one upright.
I like the fact that you were in the car. If you would have been on foot out there with it with no means of protection or getting away, I can only imagine how different it would be talking to you about this now.
Yeah, it'd be a whole lot different because I probably wouldn't even be able to talk. I'd still be in shock over it. You know, I don't know how these people that have had this happen cope with it because, I mean, I've woken up in the middle of the night covered in sweat thinking about this thing. And the whole blankets are wet and everything, just, you know, dreaming and thinking about this. I'm a bow hunter. I go out. When you're out with a gun hunting, you know, there's no leaves on the trees. You can kind of see around even in the dark. When you're a bow hunter, the whole woods you go through hollow, you know, going through all these thick places. You know, I was hunting the other day. I was coming out of there and I'm thinking, what if this thing hops out on the, you know, what am I going to do, you know? I'm not going to let it ruin my life. If it hops out, it hops out. I guess it's going to get me. That's the way I've been thinking about it. I mean, I saw it for a reason. What that reason is, I don't know. And I don't believe I'm the only one that's seen it. My cousin, he claimed to have seen something very similar to that, probably about not even a half a mile from that same location. He didn't get as good a look at it as I did, but he said it was a big dog-like animal standing along the side of the road in a big gully in a horse pasture. And he thought the guy, he wasn't driving. The guy slowed down and turned around because he told him there was something back there, and they shined the lights around and it was gone. They couldn't turn around fast enough to get back.
When you heard about that incident, were you thinking that this must have been some kind of a feral dog that he saw and maybe misidentified, couldn't tell what it was, or did you have any inkling that it might have been something that was unnatural, like what you wound up seeing that night?
I think it was pretty much what I saw, because he's pretty good in the outdoors. He's hunted his whole life too, and he said the thing was huge. And he said it was definitely dog-like. In fact, that's what he said. He thought it was some kind of gigantic dog, you know, because he said he got a half-decent look at the outline of it, but he didn't get any details of it. So I would think it could be the same thing. Maybe I'm wrong. Who knows? But you know, something that big, you know, there isn't very many dogs around that I know of that even get that big. You know, I've seen Mastiffs and Great Danes, and I mean, Great Dane would be about the thing, but it's not big enough. It's not bulky enough. It doesn't have the fur, you know. So it's a big animal.
Yeah, it tends to leave an impression on you. How long before your encounter did your cousin have his?
I think he said it was about a month before I saw mine.
About a month before. Before all this happened, had you heard any rumblings about dogmen? Had you heard the word dogman before, or was this all new to you? Is it something that you didn't know about until after you had your encounter?
I tell you, this is all brand new to me. I mean, you know, after it happened, I just dwelled on it. I wanted to know what this thing was. And one of the reasons that I wanted to know what this thing was is I got no more. I thought when I took off from seeing it, I thought, man, I should call the police or call a game warden or somebody to come out here and check this thing out, because it doesn't look too friendly. You know, it's a wicked-looking unit. I got 2 miles down the road, and lo and behold, here come 2 game wardens, one in front of the other, and the one in the front had his light on, and they were flying in that direction where I just saw that thing. So I'm almost 100% sure that somebody else saw it and called in, or it was causing a disturbance around somebody's house, and somebody called. There's no reason for them to be out there at 2 in the morning at that time of the year in this area. No reason for it. And there's a few people I know that work up here at the local store, and they said they were coming in and out of there for probably a week or two straight, all hours of the night. So I'm thinking they know it's out there. People are reporting something being out there. They wouldn't be out there at night patrolling around for them. There's no reason. It's not hunting season. You know, they're not looking for poachers or anything like that. That struck me as odd. After, you know, immediately seeing this thing, no more than 5-10 minutes later, there's the game warden going that way. So that struck me as odd.
It sure makes you wonder about what their protocol is once they head down the road and get to that area, if it is still there. I sure wonder what they're supposed to do, what their instructions are, but of course we'll never know. Now, you shared with me in the pre-interview that your wife was at a convenience store and something interesting happened. What's behind all that?
And my wife went in there that very night that I saw it. I went up after seeing it, got up there, and me and the boys waited till daylight. We went out, we hunted turkey, didn't have any luck. I stayed till around 1 o'clock, and I came back down here, checked on the house, and I came back down here, and pretty much I actually did stop there where I saw it. There was a driveway down a ways. So I stopped there, and I asked, there was a guy mowing the grass. He didn't know. He was a farmhand. And I asked him, I said, do you have a big dog here? And that's what I wanted to know, you know. I was thinking, well, maybe I just saw somebody's big new species of dog. I mean, you're breeding all these wolves and all this stuff together. So I stopped and I asked, and he said, no, we had a Jack Russell here, but he disappeared a couple weeks ago. So that kind of, I was like, oh boy, okay, and that was that. And then later on that night, my wife works night shift, and she went in there, and there was 2 game wardens coming out with their coffee. She goes in around 11, so she saw the game wardens there too. She'd seen them coming in and out of there pretty much all that week. She was going to work. There was something out there that they were looking for, or tracking, one or the other. They know how to bring them down.
That might be, but I'm not so sure about that. It's hard to say on that. You told me in the pre-interview, I'm not sure if this was because of that encounter you had or if this was before you had that encounter, but at some point you put a bunch of game cams up around your property. Something interesting happened as a result of that. Please tell us about what happened.
I put 3 trail cams out, pre-scouting for deer, and also seeing if this thing might sneak its way around here somewhere, because it's not far from here. It's probably a half a mile, and if you took out the road, it's probably, you know, going down the road, if you just cut straight across through fields and stuff, it'd be less than that. So I put out trail cams. I got a pretty interesting picture of them. I mounted my trail camera up high to try and get across this. There's like a fence that runs back across the back of my property. It's like a 10-foot tall wooden fence. Us and the neighbors used to not get along, so we put this big giant fence across there so we didn't look at each other. Anyway, I put the camera there high. It was 5 feet. It was probably right about mounted about the height of my neck, so I could get the proper scope of this flat for deer. And I got a picture of something. It looks like the back of a wolf dog is what it looks like. Everybody that sees it gets creeped out by it because they don't know what it is. One guy's like, that's a deer's tail. I said, well, unless a deer just turned into a moose, you know, there's no way that's a deer's tail, man. It was 5 feet off the ground. He was like, oh. And he's like, well, maybe it was the back of it. So deer don't have hair that looks like that. You know, the hairs, I mean, you can plainly see how they sweep back, like, just like the thing I saw. I saw the back of its neck. It's kind of maney, you know what I mean? It has that swoop. And, it just kind of spooked me, that's all. Maybe it's some kind of anomaly. Hopefully it's some kind of bug on the lens, but, I don't think it is. And that's that story.
So you said that land that butts up against your property, it consists of quite a few acres of untouched forest?
Well, I wouldn't say untouched. It does get hunted, and people do walk it and stuff, but it's a pretty thick, nasty chunk of ground. I mean, if someone to hide in there, it definitely could. I mean, thing that makes me think that things like this, now I know it exists, but for people to say that they can't, it's just foolish. Because I've hunted gigantic bucks, and some of them have just completely vanished, and I thought, well, somebody got him, and lo and behold, months down the road, there he is again. So where did he go this whole time? Where has he been hiding it? You know, if a deer can hide from you, something like that is definitely smarter than a deer. It showed intelligence. I saw it. I mean, it definitely had an intelligent look on its face, like it was telling me to leave it alone. I'm a believer now. I saw one. I know that they exist, and they can hide just about anywhere, probably. Now, if a big buck can hide in a 200-acre patch of woods and nobody can get him, that dog man sure can do the same thing.
Yeah, as if they weren't scary enough, looking the way they do and everything, and acting the way they do too, knowing that they've got that kind of intelligence, that just really puts it over the top. Speaking of deer, Wes, when you were hunting one time, something really strange happened. Tell us about that.
I had hung a stand in a new area on this ridge line. The lady that used to own the property never let anybody hunt down there. It was a really nasty thick, had the big apple thorns and just real nasty. But the deer would come out of her property and come across ours, and then that's where I'd get them when they came out of the thicket. So I had this, what I call a plague doe. the doe busted me one day and seen me in the tree. Well, then every time she come out of there, no matter where she come from, she come right over there and let everybody in the woods know that I was there. So the next time I saw her, she come up and I shot her. She took off running down the hills with a bow. She went down. I heard her crash. That's bow terms for going down. She went down. I heard her go down. I waited a few minutes. I climbed down. It was just getting dark on my flashlight. I started down there, and I heard just about 15, 20 minutes went by. And I started down the hill, and I got on the blood trail and got up. And just before I got up on, I seen a flash of something run off that was pretty decent size. Just took a glimpse from the flashlight and broke sticks and ran off. And at first I thought probably another deer. I got up on this deer. When I shined the light on it, I was like, whoa. The whole back quarter from just underneath of the tail all the way down was completely gone. Whatever did it, it looked like it did it in one or two chomps. Lumps are generally 10 to 15 pounds on a regular deer. So whatever did that, it would have had to been, I don't know. It's just hard to explain. I don't believe that a coyote could have ran down there or a dog could have ran down there that fast and ate that much meat that quick. It just didn't look right. It looked like it was done in one or two chomps, the way it went through the meat and the meat was all pulled together. It was weird. So I ended up losing most of my meat on that deer. That was that kind of weird encounter I had that I thought was weird. I've never had that happen to me before, so it's pretty weird. In the past, or years before that, I had shot deer that I knew I'd gotten and trailed them and found the arrow, and the deer was gone. There was nothing there. There was no drag mark, no blood, no nothing. Like it just was gone. But I trumped that up to somebody stealing it, grabbing it and picking it up and carrying it out. But who knows now? Now that I know this, I mean, the size of that thing, if it's got hands, it could scoop a deer up in each hand, throw it over its mouth, and just walk off with them like nothing.
I'm sure, Wes, that there is no shortage of skeptics listening to this show right now that are thinking it was just a bear that came in and did that. But do you have any bear in your area?
Absolutely. Not in this area we don't. Up north we do. I've never seen a bear down here. Nobody that I know has ever seen a bear here. It's just too close to civilization, I would imagine. But as long as I can remember, I've never heard of anybody seeing a bear here. I know what a bear looks like. And I know bear tracks looks like. I've never seen a bear track in this area. Where my house is up north, I've seen bears. I can tell you what I saw doesn't look anything like a bear. You can't even compare the two together. It's werewolf-like. If you ever seen Underworld, then you've seen what I saw. That's an easy way to explain it. Well, I'm fortunate that I was in the car. Some of the people I heard, on your shows and other stories that I've heard weren't that fortunate. They're terrified to even go outside at night. I see why. I've never, before I used to open the door and go out there and, parade around in the dark, fooling around. Not anymore. I got the lights on. I'm looking around. I want to make sure that thing ain't out there. The sad part is you could probably use all the precautions you want. If it wanted to get a hold of you, there's nothing you can do about it. There wouldn't be a thing you can do to stop that thing. If it's every bit as fast as people say it is, which it looks fast to me, being that powerful and muscular, I imagine it could go pretty fast on the run. I don't think you'd stand a chance against it if it wanted you. I can't fathom people actually going out there and looking for this thing. I mean, I don't understand that. That really gets to me. It's not something I want to ever see again. When these people want to go out and look for it, I don't know. They're on their own with that.
Yeah, that's something I will never understand. I can understand wanting a thrill, but putting yourself in a position like that just, to me, doesn't make a lick of sense. You talked about the speed that this thing looked like it could attain. How would you describe its legs? We never talked about them.
The way it was standing on all fours, it was kind of crouched down a little, but it was also kind of in a little swell. So the actual height of it, I can't really pinpoint. Somewhere around 2 feet, and then it was down in there a little bit. So height-wise, it was probably around 3.5, somewhere maybe in that neighborhood. Hard to say, but the muscles on its legs were humongous. And the way that it was standing, its elbows were back, like rolled back, and its chest was jammed. You could see its big, bulky chest rammed out, you know, and you could see the lower fronts going down. It was huge, the legs. And the way the backs were, the way it was crouched, the hock, I seen the one hock was like poked straight across, like the grass line, like along its stomach, you know what I mean? Because it was crouched down, so you could tell that it had big, powerful, long legs. I've seen how fast a coyote can run. I mean, a coyote is fast. I mean, they could roll. I couldn't imagine the speed this thing could produce with that muscle structure. I mean, it would have to be much faster, just in my opinion. I mean, it would have to be a lot faster than anything else out there. It'd probably run a deer down like nothing.
You told me that your brother used to rent a property where some really strange things happened. Please tell us about that.
Yeah, we used to go down there and party and drink beer and carry on. It was an old farmstead, and it had old cabins that were all run down. It was like in the 60s or something. The Flower Children lived back there, and they were Seventh-day Adventists or something like that, whatever they are. And anyway, it was all, you know, old run-down farm pretty much. But it was 90 acres there, and then next to us was another 100 and some, and then on the other side was another 100 and some. It was pretty rural back in there, good hunting. But we've heard some pretty weird stuff back in there, too. A couple howling sounds, real loud, like a Bigfoot-style howl, and a real loud scream, like a woman screaming almost, but with a rumble to it. And a couple times, you know, we'd be down there doing our thing. We'd have fire and it rings down behind the barn. I can remember, you know, my brother's friends with a lot of bikers. We were all drinking beer and carrying on. This thing let off this thunderous roar howl up on that hill, and we felt it was that loud. Everybody got dead silent, and the one guy looked at me and handed me his pistol, and he's like, go up there and see what that was. I was like, I'm not going up there. You're on your own, buddy. You go up there and see what it was. It was pretty startling. You go in there in the mornings hunting, you know. We didn't tend to go in there as early as a lot of the other places we hunted due to the feeling. It felt like you were being watched all the time. You'd swear something's right there looking at you, you know. It's just one of those things. A really spooky place. Really spooky.
It sounds like it is pretty spooky in that area. As far as food sources would go, Wes, what do you think it survives on? Because there are quite a few areas that have deer, but not nearly enough to support something like that.
I can tell you this much, it's a fact. You go into any convenience store around here, you go into any grocery, you go anywhere, and there's animal missing signs everywhere down here. And I mean everywhere. There's plenty of deer, there's plenty of cats, there's plenty of dogs, there's plenty of rabbits, there's plenty of small game.
Didn't you say there's a sheep farm nearby as well?
Yes, there's a sheep farm that was adjacent to where I saw this thing. Maybe the wardens were running there because one of the sheep got attacked and somebody saw something. I mean, a lot of those thoughts cross my mind. Who knows? But yeah, there's cattle ranches around, you know, cattle, horses, sheep, goats. If there's one place down the road here, it's got a lot of goats. So, I mean, there's no shortage of food for something like that.
Yeah, I'm sure these things are really good at getting fed. A big dog wouldn't pose any challenge for one, so it would just wind up being another meal for it.
I mean, this is something that I just remembered the other day that I forgot to mention in the pre-interview. Years ago, when I first moved to the mountains, it was probably 12 years ago, 10 or 12 years ago, I met a guy. His name was Bob, and he's a truck driver, and he went to Maine a lot. And we were, you know, drinking beer one night in the shed, and we were talking about hunting, and then we started talking about Bigfoot. And I remembered this the other day, that he told me that he saw a dog man. And I asked him, what in the heck are you talking about? What is the dog man? And he said, oh my God, in Maine? He said, this thing is like major, man. He goes, a lot of people have seen it and stuff. And he goes, in the area where I deliver this cheese to, he says, a real windy, long, whippy road goes through all these rural hills and stuff. And he goes, that's where I saw it cross the road in front of me. And it's pretty funny that I remember that he told me that. Now here I am, here I see one. But he said it was the same thing pretty much of what I saw, the description of it. He said that it was big, gray, dog-looking thing. I just remembered that the other day. Now, that was the first time I'd ever heard of it, but I didn't remember nothing about it, you know what I mean? It didn't hit me until the other day, him saying that.
Yeah, these things are a lot more common than what you would ever imagine. There are a lot more people who have seen these things than you'll ever know. For some time now, truckers driving through Nevada have talked about these werewolves that run up alongside their trucks. I'm not sure how long this has been going on. At first, when I heard that, I thought it was just Sasquatch out there, but before too long, I came to think it must be dogmen they're talking about.
Yeah, it's amazing. I always tell people, I'm a believer that people think they're so smart, they know everything that's out there, and you don't. I mean, we don't even know what's in the ocean, let alone what's, hiding out here on the land. There's just too much rural area and too many smart animals, like they say. I mean, an intelligent white-tailed deer that knows people is pretty much almost impossible. I ain't gonna say impossible to hunt or kill, but it's not an easy task. And something that's even more intelligent and a predator on top of that, he could live out there pretty as a picture and nobody would ever, if he didn't want to be seen, he wouldn't want to be, you wouldn't see him. Only on rare occasion.
That is a really scary thought. Well, it's about time to wrap this interview up, but before I ask you to give any closing comments you have, what would you say to someone who's seen one of these things? They feel like they're the only one in the world who has. What would you say to that eyewitness that would help them feel better and get over this encounter that they had, knowing what you went through and what you've done to try and help yourself recover from it?
I'd say the best thing to do is actually tell somebody about it. I mean, talk to somebody who you can trust that ain't going to make fun of you. I know what I saw, and what I saw was a dog man or a werewolf or whatever, beast, whatever you want to call it. It wasn't an animal that I knew that was supposed to be here. It's not supposed to be here. And it is. And people need to know that it's out there. If you see one of these things, your best bet is try to get yourself away from it. After that initial trauma, you need to deal with it and talk to somebody about it. And call Vic. He knows about them. He'll help you through it or whatever. I mean, I don't know. It's a different experience, not something you ever expect to experience. But if it happens to you, you'll understand real quick what it's like. I'd also recommend not looking for them. I can tell you that. You're out there and you're wanting to look for this thing, and you don't have it all together, you don't know what you're doing, you're playing with fire. You're going to get burned. I don't care if there's 10 of you with shotguns and rifles. If it wanted you, it's going to get most of you. Or not all of you. It's that big, and it's not something you want to fool around with. I just think of the damage a bear could do to you if it got a hold of you. Now you add part wolf to it. And you give it some intelligence. Some real intelligence. And that thing will devastate you.
And the ability to grab onto you with hands that have talon-like claws on the fingertips, yeah, it just goes downhill from there.
It doesn't get any better. If that thing would have stood up on me and been walking on two legs with hands like I said, I probably would have lost my cookie. I probably would have just wrecked the car or something stupid you see in the movies. He'd be eating me.
Something, Wes, that I like to share with eyewitnesses, especially the ones that are really shook up because of their encounters, is the fact that they might have been up close and personal to one of these things, but in almost every instance it let them go without putting a scratch on them. I always ask them to try and see the experience for what it was, not for what they're making it out to be. It's easy when you consider how scary these things look to make them out to be bloodthirsty monsters. And yeah, sure, there are attacks that happen. They seem to be very rare, though. If you do have a close-up and personal encounter with one of these things and walk away unscathed, that happened because it decided it did not want to attack you. If you sit around and stew pot, making it into something that it's not, looking at it as if it's some kind of monster that's going to attack you on sight, you're just going to make things that much worse on yourself. So, yeah, if you've seen one of these things and, like most eyewitnesses, were able to walk away without a scratch, please see it, like I said, for what it is. That'll really work wonders helping you get over that encounter that you had. And like Wes just said, if you need help with it, if you want to just talk about it in privacy and never let anyone else know about the conversation, I'm perfectly fine with that. I'd be more than happy to help. But having said that, do you have any closing comments you'd like to share, Wes?
I think we pretty much wrapped it up. I just want everybody to know I ain't got no reason to come on this show and make up stories about what I saw. I saw what I saw. You either believe it or you don't. Hopefully you don't have to experience what I did to be a believer. It's a scary thing to run across. And it's not something you want to run across outside of a car. Like I said, it's a pretty scary experience for me, and I was in a vehicle. So don't be surprised if you ever come across one. They are out there.
Well, those are all really good comments and words. Like I said before, I can't tell you how glad I am knowing that you were in that car instead of being out there on foot with it on the ground. It just makes you sick when you hear about some of these encounters people have. For example, there was this one poor woman who was camping, if I remember correctly, way out in the middle of nowhere. It was late. It was almost, I think, the middle of the night. She had to go use the restroom, so she crawled out of her tent, and as she was coming up onto her feet, she realized that she was coming nose to nose with one of these things that had crept up on her. So if you can only imagine what someone like that goes through trying to recover from an encounter like that, that's why I say that's a perfect example of why I'm telling you that I'm so glad that you were in a car and to a certain degree removed from this thing.
Yeah, that would definitely help to go into the bathroom situation. I can tell you, it'd be over for that. Yeah, that would be scary.
No matter how scary your encounter was, it could always be worse, so try to keep that in mind. Well, having said that, Wes, I want to thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story. I really appreciate it.
Okay, you're welcome. I'm glad to be on your show, and I'm glad you're there for people to get this stuff out in the open. Maybe people will start seeing the light, know that they're out there.
Well, I hope they do see the light. It's a fact that they are, in fact, out there, whether some want to believe it or not. Thanks again for coming on, and have yourself a great night.
Okay, you too.
Will do. Thank you.
Yep, bye-bye.
Bye. If you've had a dogman encounter and you'd like to speak with me about it, whether in private or on the show, you can reach me at contact@dogmanencounters.com. I'd love to hear from you. episode 64. Hello, thanks for tuning in to this special midweek episode of Dogman Encounters Radio. I'm Vic Cundiff, and I'll be your host on the show. It's my pleasure to welcome Paul Sinclair back to the show. If you'll remember, Paul was the guest for episode 62. Paul, welcome back to the show.
Thank you very much for allowing me to come back.
You know, episode 62 that we did about a week and a half or so ago, it was a very popular show. You were kind of pressed for time, and that's understandable because of the time difference. I've been looking forward to bringing you back on because I know there are a lot of other interesting topics that we can talk about.
Excellent. No problem at all, Vic. I'm sorry to say I've not really got any new accounts that I can share with the readers, but in the last interview we did touch on little bits of the history of the area of Flixton and the surrounding areas of East and North Yorkshire. So, if you like, Vic, we could talk a little bit tonight about these places and maybe the significance to what we were talking about and what your show's all about.
That sounds really good. Flixton used to be known by a different name, you told me in the pre-interview. What can you tell us about that?
Indeed it did, Vic. I found out, and obviously anyone wanting to do a little bit of research on this can find out, that Flixton used to be known as Wolfland, which is interesting in itself when we're talking about the Flixton werewolf. Obviously, the East Yorkshire wolds and the North Yorkshire moors in ancient times were populated by wolves. I would have thought quite densely populated. The Flixton Star Car, which is the Mesolithic archaeological site, there's lots of artifacts and things being dug up in that area, showing that wolves were sort of highly prevalent in the area. But for a place to be called Wolfland, sort of adds a little bit more weight to this story, I feel. And there's little sort of links to other areas as well, Vic. When we spoke the other week, we kept touching on the road, the A1039. The last account that I got from the young lady on the island known as Spittle Corner, again the A1039, at the side of it is the old Spittle Farm. That place is the place where in ancient times, going way back into the 10th century, in the reign of King Athelstan, a knight who was then Lord of Flixton built a refuge to protect travellers from wolves, and it says, and infestation of savage beasts, lest they be devoured. These are in ancient writings by a scribe known as Camden. I don't know how far back that writing goes, but Camden wrote about this. What is interesting is, obviously, the refuge was built at Spittle Corner. A lot of writers have said it was built in Flixton. It's actually not Flixton, it's at Staxton. However, going through lots of research in various archives and places, the Bailgate at Bridlington, which was part of the Bridlington Priory, the one at Staxton, the refuge at Staxton, was called St Mary's Spittle, and that was overseen by the Bridlington Priory. But I found out that there was a second one in Flixton. It stood where Flixton House now stands, or once stood. I don't know if Flixton House is still there. And that one was Carman's Spittle. Now, that name is interesting in itself, because just below Flixton we have Flixton Star Car, which is a real sort of interesting place which we've just touched on. It's a Mesolithic site, and it boasts some fabulous artifacts that have been dug up around the area of Star Car, which would have been a lake in ancient times. It was after the Ice Age and man settled there. So the inhabitants of Star Car go back like 11,000 years, Vic. Some archaeologists have said that they thought these people were shaman. They found evidence of ritual killings, as in piles and piles of bones and horse butchery. One thing that they found nowhere else, other than Star Car, preserved in the mud, is 21 red deer skull caps with aisles shaped into them and holes for straps. And it is thought by archaeologists that the early inhabitants of Star Car were using these in their ritualistic, what would you call it, their performances. Working as shamans, they wouldn't have realised that we term them as that now, I know. But it sort of throws a little bit of interest for me on the story of the Flixton werewolf. if we consider the shamans all around the world that think that they go into altered states and become the animal of which the skin or the bones they're sort of wearing or working with. So if any of that was true, or if there is an ounce of truth in any of that, it takes the story of the Flixton werewolf far, far further than the 10th century. We're going back 11,000 years with the people of Starkar. It's actually the found evidence of Britain's oldest house at Starkar, dating back to 9000 BC. So I'm not trying to convince anybody that this is the reason we've got the story of the Flixton werewolf, but we've got a very, very sort of ancient place with lots and lots of history that can be sort of documented and backed up in the form of these skull caps, in the form of the archaeologists who believe that, well, I won't say all the archaeologists, but certainly archaeologists believe that the inhabitants of Starkar were shaman. So I think it makes for interesting thought anyway when we're considering what the origins of this creature really are.
Just so I'm clear on something, you mentioned Carmen Spittle, I believe.
Yeah, that's correct, Vic. Yeah, the first refuge built to protect travellers from an infestation of savage beasts. I'm sorry to labour on it, but these are the words that are used. The first one is at Spittle Corner at Staxton. This is the one that's been written about by previous authors, I would think. I don't think they will have known about the one in Flixton itself, because it's really took some digging out, and the information I've found has been in archives within the Bailgate and places at Bridlington Priory. Having said that, we've found out that there was a second one in Flixton called Carman's Spittle. Now, I only say it's of interest because there's only a mile apart. If we're going back, I don't know, to 10th century, we've got two refuges built to protect travellers from wolves and these savage beasts within a mile of each other, which is unusual in itself. But that said, it's close to Flixton Starkar, and I'm thinking, we've got the inhabitants of Starkar who may have been practicing shamanism. Now, I don't know if there's any truth in shamanism, but certainly cultures all around the world believe that this is real. I've not enough knowledge to say whether it is or it isn't, and there may be people just rolling their eyes as they're listening to this, but I mean, it's been practiced for thousands of years. If there's any truth in this story, but then we've got Flixton Starkar and the inhabitants of Starkar. Just above the lake, which was Lake Flixton, we have a refuge built called Carman's Spittle. I don't know if there's any link to the name Carman's Spittle. Once again, without being able to actually step back 1,000 years or 2,000 years, we're never going to know. It's only speculation, but nevertheless, I find it highly interesting.
That is really incredible. You mentioned writing there, Paul. You're writing a book. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah. I'm writing a book that's called The Truth That Leaves No Proof, which it can encompass all of this kind of stuff. I've set off writing everything within a 25 to 30 mile radius of RAF Bempton, close to us, because so many strange things have happened around that area, Vic. Planes crashing between 10 and 25 miles off the head at Flamborough, compass anomalies that the trawlermen tell me about that only occur sort of once in a fisherman's lifetime, all around the same area. I've got recorded testimonies of trawlermen who've recovered bodies from the sea, from these aircraft, and they've been radioactive, the bodies. So I got into all these stories, and the Flixton werewolf story kept cropping up amongst them, you know, because we took every so often, I mean, 1997, 2006, 1977, there's been a spate of big cat sightings, or unusual cat sightings, because they don't seem to conform to what we would consider a big cat to look like, even though we're supposed to have none that live native in the UK. People have said after British Wildlife that these things, I think it was 1976, were released into wild, and I should think that some were. But the life expectancy is probably between 12 and 17 years. Well, we're a lot further down the road than 12 and 17 years from 1976, and these things are still being seen. So, to touch back on Flixton Werewolf, this story kept cropping up. I thought, well, it'll be sort of easy to put away in a few pages. I'm pretty sure that It's just a legend, and there's not a lot to it. But as I got speaking to people and talking to different people around Flixton and Falkton and Caton, all these small villages, people actually knew about it. It took quite a lot of getting out, as I said in the first talk that we did, Vic, but people had actually heard of the Flixton werewolf and actually had stories to tell, and right up to the accounts of up to present day. So it's grown from what I thought would be a couple of pages into quite a massive bit of writing. In fact, I think you could write a book about it on its own. So that's how we come to the Flixton werewolf, Vic.
There's a town close to Flixton by the name of Humnby, if I pronounced it right, hopefully, that has in the past been known by a different name with a dog or wolf reference. What can you tell us about that?
I can tell you, Vic, that you've pronounced it right. It's Hunmanby, Hummanby. However, in its ancient past, it was known as Hundmanby. Hundmanby, the reason it was called that was because it was known as the farmstead of the Hound Man. The reasons why it was known as farmstead of the Hound Man possibly could be because the king kept his hounds at Hummanby. That is written, but it could also have other sort of reasons in that we've got the Flixton werewolf, or the stories of the Flixton werewolf, less than 4 miles away. There's Howell Moor at Goathland, which is 19 miles away. We have obviously Flixton, which was Wolfland. At Goathland, we have a creature called a Gytrash, which was a huge black dog or goblin horse. Why somebody should describe it as a goblin horse, I really don't know. But I find it interesting that we've got all these references to the dogs and the sort of savage creatures. The goblin horse, I can only think that where you have it, you have bears, you have all sorts of different animals that would compare in size to the things that people are looking at when they view the dogman. However, we've got nothing in the UK, really. We've got deer, I suppose, and we've got ponies. So I'm wondering when people are seeing such a surreal thing, quite savage looking, that's why they're referring it to something like a goblin horse. But it comes up as a huge black dog as well, and that, as I say, is at Goathland. At Goathland we do have Howell Moor. So that's just sort of two places quite close with references to dogs and hounds that sort of don't fit the norm.
Well, where there's smoke, there's normally fire. I'd say since all these villages in that area have dog or wolf references, maybe there was something going on back then that led all these people to name these villages that way.
That's correct, Vic. Yeah, I mean, once again up in Goathland, one thing I've not touched on, we've got Howling Dyke as well. And we've got Hundman Dykes up at Forden. Now, I've never touched on Forden in the talks, but Forden's at the top of Staxton Wold, just over the top, half a mile away. That's a place where the big cats have been seen quite often. So it was only when looking at Hummanby and finding out Hundman, as in Houndman, that when I looked at an old map and saw Hund Dykes at Forden, I realised what they were referring to, and it's Hound Dykes. It's spelt the same. I've been told there is a burial mound, although I haven't been able to find it on any map. I've been told by an old chap who's a bit of an historian, called Wolf Howe, up around Staxton, but I've not got anything sort of on paper to verify that at the moment, Vic.
With regards to the refuges you talked about, you said that they were constructed allegedly to protect travelers from savage beasts as one of the threats. Was there ever a mention of what type of savage beasts they were trying to protect these travelers from?
No mention, Vic. And what's interesting is it says for protection from wolves and an infestation of savage beasts. So it's something other than a standard wolf, I would have thought, or maybe I'm reading too much into it.
It sure does make you wonder. I can't help but notice that they described it as being an infestation. So we're not talking about just one or two scattered about. There must have been quite a few of these things, whatever it is that they're talking about.
That's correct. And there was one other thing that's just come into my mind. When we were talking about Flixton Star Car, the Mesolithic site where the early men lived 11,000 years ago, I think it's Camden again that writes that the wolves of Star Car used to cause carnage when they descended or came out because they preferred the blood of the animal to the flesh of the animal. Now, not being a hunting man and not knowing much about wolves, if I'm being truthful, I don't know whether that's the norm, Vic. I mean, I would have thought they'd have preferred the flesh, but this is sort of ancient writings by a scribe called Camden, going back hundreds and hundreds of years. But why he should say that, I don't know. As I say, it is an ancient bit of writing. I don't even know where I've got it now to sort of read the exact text to you, but I do have it.
A lot of these things are very hard to figure. All this talk about wolves and strange behavior brings up another question for you. You told me that the Saxons had a unique name for January. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, the Saxons called January Wolf Month, and it meant the month that you were most likely to be devoured, eaten by wolves, the leanest month of the year. So they called it Wolf Month, which is sort of quite frightening, really, isn't it?
That is a scary thought. That does make sense, though, that they would call it that. If you think about it, January, there really aren't going to be very many resources for wolves to feed on, so if you have slow-walking travelers out there in the woods with no really effective means of protection, I can understand how that would be a big problem.
Well, they would be fair game, I would think, Vic, wouldn't they, you know?
Yeah, that wouldn't be a good situation. Speaking of the Saxons, you also told me that they were out to catch a man who had an interesting name that they had given him. What can you tell us about that?
That's right. There's an old book that's been written in 1605. I'm not sure of the surname. I'm going to pronounce it, but it's probably going to be wrong, and I think it's Richard Vesturgens. If I'm wrong with the surname, then listeners, I do apologise. The book is called A Restitution of Decayed Intelligence, and it sort of chronicles the Saxons and their sort of lifestyle, and he talks quite a bit about wolves and werewolves. He recites, again, I think he's reciting what Camden earlier wrote. They were hunting a man called Goodwin. They put a price on his head. They called him Wolfhead. Now, I don't know whether they called Goodwin Wolfhead because he took on the form of a wolf, or whether that's the terminology that they used for someone who was being hunted, for want of a better word. But Goodwin was called Wolfhead, and that can be found in this ancient book called A Restitution of Decayed Intelligence. And if I'd have had more time, Vic, I would have talked more about what the book says about the werewolves in the book, because it really sort of was interesting. Werewolf sounds like it originates from Germany. You probably already know that, Vic. I don't know whether you do, but from what I've read in this book, it does. In France, they called it the loup-garou. Is any of this familiar to you, Vic?
It is familiar. We do have our own loup-garou references here down south in the Louisiana area.
That is interesting, Vic, yeah, because this book, 1605, Restitution of Decayed Intelligence, it says in Germany they were called werewolf, in France, loup-garou. So these names for similar creatures, they go back hundreds and hundreds of years.
It sure seems like there must be something to it. You told me you think the moon might have connections to sightings of dogmen. What can you tell us about these theories you have?
I don't want anybody to think that I'm imagining that these things are changing at the sight of a full moon as depicted in a Hollywood film or a horror film, because that is not what I think. It's just that doing research into the book and living close to the North Sea, I've been checking tide times for the strange things that have happened. There's missing people at Bempton. 12 have gone since 2004, just vanished. Please don't think I'm connecting them to this, because I'm not trying to, but it tied in with the moon, and I noted that these missing people, the bulk of them had gone on a waning gibbous moon. However, the creature that was seen at Danes Dyke at Flamborough was seen on a blood moon. There's probably no connection, it's probably pure coincidence. The one that was seen a few months ago, the last one, it was seen on a blue moon. Now, I'm quite happy for people to correct me if I've got my information about the moon wrong, but I believe a blue moon is when there's two full moons in the same month, hence you say once in a blue moon. So I was just wondering if there is any connection to the moon. once again, don't ask me why. As I previously stated, if you've looked at everything and you've searched all logical answers, then you've got to start looking at illogical answers. Because if you can't find truth in the logical stuff, it's got to be there somewhere, or some grains of it are.
You must be a fan of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle.
Not really, no.
Yeah, that's a phrase he coined.
Really?
It sure is, with Sherlock Holmes and everything. Talking about all these strange anomalies associated with the Flixton werewolf or dogmen, you noticed something strange about ley lines in the area and how they connect to these sightings. What can you tell us about that?
Well, top of Flixton Wold, you've got R.F. Staxton Wold. Now, that was originally a Roman hill fort going back hundreds and hundreds of years. Just behind Staxton Wold, you have the Barrow Cemetery that we talked about in the last one of Sharp How. Now, Sharp How is where the chap who's an old man now saw with his friend the creature squatted down against a tree on its haunches. I'm no expert on ley lines, but I've done a little bit of research on this. In between Sharp How and the Rudston Monolith, which will be about 12 miles away, there's a lot of ley lines said to emanate from the Rudston Monolith. It's the tallest standing stone in Britain, by the way, the Rudston Monolith. Don't ask me to say how tall it is, because I just haven't got that information on the top of my head. But there's a burial mound called Willie Howe. It's probably the most famous one in England, so if anybody wants to type it in, it's just W-I-L-L-Y and Howe, with an E on the end. Now, me and my wife took some dowsing rods and we went round Willie Howe last year, and we found that there's two lines cross in the centre of Willie Howe, and yes, these rods did work. Never used them before. They did turn in, and we put stakes in the ground where they were turning in. We both tried it. We went over the area several times. We spent a full afternoon up there. The centre of the mound, it looks like these lines cross at Willie Howe. Now, there's been no dogman sightings at Willie Howe, but there's been lots of UFO activity at Willie Howe and big cats. What I find interesting is then if you get an ordnance survey map and you put a ruler on it from Rudston Monolith, because one of the lines runs to Rudston Monolith. From Rudston Monolith, it runs through Willie Howe and up to Flixton Star Car. Then we've got an area of land at Bempton called the Leys, associated with ley lines. The whole area is scattered with standing stones and ley lines. It seems strange that these areas collect or seem a magnet for strange activity. There's got to be a connection to the ley lines. It's some unseen energy. Like I said to you before, and I don't expect everybody to agree with me, I think there's more to these creatures than pure flesh and blood. Otherwise, I think these expert marksmen and hunters at your side of the world would have brought one down by now. And I'm just not sure if these things aren't interdimensional. Maybe the ley lines have something to do with it. I'm talking without any knowledge, as in scientific knowledge, but who has any knowledge on this? Everything has to start somewhere, and I'm sort of scratching my head and looking at the ley lines, looking at the area, looking at all the burial mounds. They were all put in these locations because of something of great significance. Ancient man were probably more in tune with the spiritual side of things and more open to receiving this kind of thing than we are today. I mean, we're just dumbed down with media and what science tells us is real and what isn't real. We're not open to anything. I mean, they say seeing is believing. I believe that believing is seeing, because I think if you're more open, you're more likely to see these things. Just a theory.
I think you're onto something there. You know, going back to the whole idea about the waning moon and patterns or whatnot, I'm asked from time to time if they only come out when there's a full moon, if the moon seems to have any type of bearing on when you're going to encounter one of these things, and I can tell you that no, that does not seem to be the case. They've been seen when there's been a new moon, in other words, no moon out in the sky. They've been seen under partial moons, full moons, you name it. So there doesn't, on my end, appear to be any rhyme nor reason as to when you're going to encounter one of these things. So please do keep that in mind.
I will do, Vic, and that's well worth knowing. And I don't mind being wrong. As I say, all I'm doing is just kicking ideas around. The biggest one I can't get my head around is how, on the many reports that I've listened to your people recount that they've shot these things and that they have little or no effect on them. And I think sooner or later we have to start asking ourselves, just what is it? I know what my bullets are capable of doing to a creature if I shoot them at this distance or that distance, and it's having no effect. Are we dealing with something that just isn't quite the norm? And another thing, Vic, I've asked two of the people that I spoke to about this Flixton werewolf, but I'd be interested to know what you think as well. Do you get a male presence? Because they felt it was male. They didn't say they think it was female.
Most people don't report seeing genitalia or getting a feel for whether the dogman they encountered was a male or a female, but that's not to say that all of the eyewitnesses are that way.
I were more leaning towards the actual feeling that the person viewing this horrifying thing gets, if I'm being truthful. I thought about it last time we spoke, and I've since spoken to the lady who saw the thing at Spittal Corner, and although she was in a vehicle travelling, she felt it were male. Not because of what she was looking at, that was the feeling that she got. It was just something that I wanted to ask you last time, and I sort of forgot all about.
Oh, that's all right. I guess if I think about it, the males probably would be more likely to go out and explore and maybe do most of the hunting if they do have a pack-type structure, but that is hard to answer. I don't have any good answers for that.
Yeah, well, that's a good point, Vic. And one other point, I'm not sure if we touched on it last time, but side of Spittal Corner, there's running water. Now, is that something that's attributed with these sightings?
Yeah, water is normally nearby.
It's a long way inland, but if we go 69 miles away to a place called Lincolnshire, they have a report of a huge black dog. It's been reported from ancient times. It's been seen, I wouldn't say recently, because I've got no reports of it in the last 4 or 5 years, but I'm concentrating on Flixton, so the reports are probably out there. So it has been seen in the last 10 or 20 years. They call that a shagfoal. And that, unusually, is seen, or has been seen, next to Spittal Hill, which I find unusual in itself, that we've got Spittal Corner at Staxton, and 69 miles away we've got this creature known as the shagfoal, a huge black dog with glowing red eyes, that has been seen quite often in an area known as Spittal Hill, where another refuge was built. I don't quite know what the link there is, but we've got a refuge built at Staxton, and we've a refuge built at Lincolnshire, 69 miles away, both with the name Spittal because they're ancient hospitals, but they both have running water at the side of them as well. The running water is built in a location where in ancient times it was convenient. But once again, just a strange coincidence that cropped up. There is, Vic, a few different names for this creature in our country that you might find interesting. We've touched on the Guy Trash in Gothland. It is also known as the Barguest in North Yorkshire. Apologies if I'm pronouncing this wrong. In East Anglia, we have the Black Shuck. Once again, huge black dog, flaming red eyes, sort of the pattern's forming, isn't it? And then we've got the Capelthwaite in Westmoreland in Cumbria, a similar creature. In the Highlands of Scotland, now this one's slightly different because it's been said to be dark green in colour, so don't ask me how that works, and it's called the Coo Sith. Coo-Sith. In Suffolk, we have the Black Shuck, or the Gallitrot. In Yorkshire, out of Flixton, because we've got the Flixton werewolf, but I should imagine it could quite easily be called any of these names, but as a generalisation in Yorkshire, these huge black dogs have been seen, and they're called the Padfoot. In Ireland, they call them the Pooka, P-O-O-K-A. In Lincolnshire, they also call it the Skriker. I should imagine it's just terminology for different areas, but they're all describing the same thing. A huge black dog with glowing red eyes. It's often described as having a shaggy mane to its body, and it's described as being upright, walking on two legs in a lot of the accounts. Another odd one is it's described as a pony. My only reasoning for that, as I've already said, is that we don't have anything as large as this that we can compare it to. In your side of the world, you think, oh, is that a bear? Until you've done some double checking. And maybe when people are seeing things like this, that's why they're relating it to A pony, I don't know. I mean, that's my reasoning with the one on Flixton Wold with the guy with the two dogs, and at first he thought it was a small pony. It was only when it got up on two legs and ran down the field that he realised that there's no way it was a pony. So yeah, there's a few names, Vic.
Speaking of the idea that these things have been around in big numbers, widespread, you told me that the farmer recently told you about a pack of some type of creature that is running around the Danes Dyke area. What can you tell us about that?
Well, I can't tell you a lot about this, Vic, but I'm hoping I can give you more information shortly. There's no way that I'm going to give the name of the farmer out, as you would appreciate. But in the last few weeks, there's been a report of a large black cat or dog. They don't actually know what they're looking at. I know there's been at least 4 independent witnesses to this in between 6 and 2 weeks, and it's been seen around Bempton, described as 4 times as big as a dog, as a large dog. Let me just rephrase that, as a large dog. Now, I don't know any large black cat, even to its native country, that's 4 times as big as a large dog. We've got 4 independent witnesses, but as a side note to this, the farmer who shared a little bit of information with me, and I'm very grateful for it, has been speaking to a few other people. And he spoke to the son of another farmer who's now passed away, who lived close to Danes Dyke, and the son said that he always remembers his father being very frightened one night of what he described as a pack of something in Danes Dyke. Now, listeners, my apologies for not being able to offer you any more than that at this moment, because I've not spoken in any detail or depth. It is my hope to speak to the actual son of this chap and get the full story of what he thought the pack of something was in Danes Dyke that frightened him years ago. So it's just a little bit of a teaser of a story, but I will be working on it.
I can't imagine what that man must have gone through if he ran into a pack of these things, if that's what it was that he encountered. That must have been a bad scene. Something that we've talked about at length is your trips out into the field at night looking for these things, Paul. What can you tell us about that?
Well, it's not just trips into the field looking for these things, Vic. I've ended up at Flixton Wold now and Staxton Wold on a night. A few of us have gone up there. Please be aware that we don't run around giggling and laughing and shining torches about like teenagers. I'll go up there and set cameras up. There's been a lot of UFO activity up the top of Staxton Wold, which is the RAF base, and we'll observe for hours. But now we've got the added interest of the Flixton story and this alleged beast that is showing up from time to time in this area. Now, I know many people listening will think I'm an absolute fool for going up there at night, and I probably am. I'm not going to try and defend myself and say, oh, I'm brave and I can do this and I can do that. If we do ever encounter this, it might be the biggest mistake I've ever made in my life. But we've found ourselves up there on a night, Vic. I mean, and it's a pretty frightening place, especially coming down. I mean, this 45-degree pitch black coming through these wood with probably 4 foot of dense edge and woodland either side of you, coming down this steep path back down from the wold. So I think I know what you're going to say next, Vic, but yeah, probably a bit foolhardy, but we've found ourselves up there.
Well, you're a grown man. You can do whatever you want to do, but yeah, it wouldn't be in my recommendation to do that sort of thing. Although understand, Paul, where I'm coming from, most of the stories that are put out there are pretty innocuous. They end with the eyewitness walking away without a scratch, shaken but not stirred. Having said that, understand, there are stories that are shared with me where that's not how it ended. With that in mind, I look at this whole phenomenon in a different light than a lot of people who have never had access to those sorts of stories. So
I can take all that on board, to be honest, Vic. I think I agree with you. I mean, you're talking to people on a regular basis. I've just hit on this story in a little area in a small part of England and sort of working on that. But you're getting regular input and information about these things on a daily basis, I would think. One thing that does sort of puzzle me, if people can just play with the idea that this thing maybe is interdimensional in nature, then do you think at times the reason it scares people, the reason it stares at people, the reason the bullets have no impact is because it's only like a mirage. Is it actually there in the physical all the time? And another thing that I'm glad you've mentioned this, Vic. People talk about everything going silent, everything being so quiet, and the strange stillness that descends when they're having these sightings. Once again, if anybody who studied the subject of UFOs would know that that is called the Oz factor. People have described seeing UFOs and saying everything went silent around them. It was as though they were in some kind of bubble. They were detached from the world. Now, if that in some kind of altered state of reality, then I don't know what is. And is that what we're encountering when we're having these encounters with these creatures? You know, there's so many factors. Bullets don't seem to have an effect on them. Suddenly everything goes quiet and we're in some kind of altered state. These are what some of your people are actually saying. So when you sort of write these things down and lay them out, you're thinking, well, we're in a different reality here. There's something not quite right. Now, the fear factor, when it tries to frighten people but doesn't do anything more than frighten people, do you think that could be because it can't actually do more than frighten people at certain times? I do know that you've said that there's been times when things haven't gone well, for want of a better word. But a lot of the accounts say how terrifying it is and how it's got such evil intent, but nothing happens. Or the guy at Sharp Howe, when they were boys and it just looked at them and they just did a runner. This thing's more than capable of bringing down anybody, I would have thought, even the most, I don't care who you are, but what we've heard about this thing and the size of it and things, it's more than capable of doing lots of things, yet we've got these altered states of reality that people seem to feel like they're in when they're viewing it. We've got the accounts of shooting at it and nothing happening. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, and then we've got other accounts which contradict everything I've said, of it harming people, of it harming livestock. So it really is a difficult one. I mean, one part of me says the interdimensional altered state, is this possible? And then the other part of it sort of throws us back into the reality of that this thing is a flesh and blood, living and breathing creature. And I don't know myself. Once again, I'm sorry, listeners, but I'm just kicking ideas out there, hoping it might make people think and hoping somebody might come back with something at me that will sort of help me to look a bit harder at it and make me think differently.
Well, I'm not going to deny that they do a lot of things that are very hard to explain. As far as some of the cases where they've been shot at but weren't killed, in instances like that, I know where they've stepped on twigs and snapped the twigs. That right there would indicate that they are in a here and now type state. If they're able to snap a twig, then you would imagine that that bullet would be able to have full effect on them. That's just something that I can't explain, but in a lot of instances like that, they've done things to indicate that they are in a here and now type state. You're not the first person to mention the possibility of them being interdimensional or having some other kind of a strange quality like that. I don't know how to explain how they do a lot of the things they do, but they sure do some awfully strange things. There's no denying that.
Yeah, I agree, Vic, and that's just thrown me onto something we talked about earlier in this ancient book, Restitution of Decayed Intelligence. This chap writes that it was believed that werewolves were ancient sorcerers, and they wore a girdle of skin, and they anointed their bodies with a cream made and derived from something linked to the devil. When they looked at themselves, they believed that they were werewolves. Anyone looking at them while they were wearing this enchanted girdle with the anointed cream that they put on the bodies on them, anyone looking at them saw a werewolf, yet they never transformed. It was some kind of mirage, some kind of illusion. Once again, we're jumping miles away from stories of Flixton werewolf and stories of dogmen at your end of the world, but it's interesting the accounts of the werewolves to sort of throw these in the mix. You know, how ancient people viewed it, and they thought that they were ancient sorcerers. Some early people did. Once again, that writing's in that literature, the Restitution. So quite what truth is in that, I don't know. I mean, some of the things that we can do now would have been looked upon as magic 100 years ago. Some of the strangest things that people say could be true.
Well, that's a good point. It might seem really strange to us that they had those ideas, but I guess it all ties in. Our current views on dogmen, their views on werewolves. it all comes together to talk about the same thing, in my opinion, so I guess it's not my place to discount that.
Yeah, I think you're right, Vic, and probably it's early man's attempt to describe and come up with ideas as to what these things that people are still seeing today. It's just we're coming up with other explanations for them as we've evolved and as we've sort of become more educated. I think ultimately they were seeing the same things back then.
Yeah, that's how I see it. I think you're right. Now, another strange phenomenon with these things that you've already noticed, you even mentioned that in the pre-interview. What do you have to say about the tendency of these things to seemingly be seen and then just disappear for a period of time?
I don't understand it at all. Can I just touch on the big cats with this?
Sure.
Because obviously we've got no native big cats here in the UK, yet we do get sightings of them, and these creatures seem to appear and become as real as any big cat seen in its native habitat, but only for a short period of time. 1977, we had a sort of flurry of big cat sightings here in eastern North Yorkshire. 2000 we had them, 2006. I'm not sure. I'm sort of linking back to this interdimensional thing, or linking it to the ley lines. Maybe some kind of energy or portal that allows these things to come through. And I realise that's going to be too much for some people to accept. I mean, when you're out hunting in woods and forests, you don't want to start thinking about portals and energy lines. Just think it's a flesh and blood thing, and I have full respect to anybody. But obviously, these are my views, and I'm not saying I'm right, but at least consider them. And I think the same thing could be happening with these dogman sightings, to be honest. And I think that's the reason that they're so elusive. I mean, they're sort of here 1 minute, and then there's nothing. Although there again, I've listened to some more of your reports where they're terrorising properties for years and years and years. So I find myself contradicting myself constantly.
You know what? Don't feel bad about that. I can't tell you how many times I've experienced that. Just when you think you've got a bead on something that they do, how they do it, something else happens to just let you know that you don't have a clue about how they do things or certain qualities with regards to them. So, yeah, I feel for you. I've been there, done that.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. I mean, you'll have heard of the alleged guy who thought he was a werewolf in the 1500s, Peter Stump.
I don't remember his name, but I think I did hear about the story.
I think he was in France, and he was executed in 1589. He believed he transformed and he was a werewolf. He killed 13 children, 2 women, 1 man, and such was the terror that this man instilled in people. They didn't even kill him in a way that, I don't know, he weren't hung or burnt at the stake. They pulled his body parts from his body. I'm sorry for being so graphic. They broke his legs and his arms on wheels. Then they pulled his body apart with hot irons. They believed he was a werewolf. I'm not saying that he was, but this was the sort of terror and fear that this instilled in the people in 1589, when this man sort of actually inflicted his reign of terror.
Yeah, well, back then they had a different way of doing things, that's for sure. After seeing something so scary, I can't blame them for overreacting, which it sure sounds like that's what they did. It's funny how time changes things, Paul. About 10 years ago, from what I understand, you were headlong into UFO research. What would you have told someone then who told you that you'd be looking into the Flixton werewolf now the way you are?
I'd have probably laughed at them, Vic, if I'm being truthful. I really would. I mean, as bizarre as the UFO accounts are, I've had a lifetime of experience with UFOs, and it's a personal experience. It really is. That'd be something to talk about another time, maybe, but we're not talking about UFOs. But the Flixton werewolf, I mean, where do you start and where do you end? I genuinely just did not think there was anything to it. I just thought it was just an old folk tale that had been handed down and handed down. But, I mean, I can tell you now that the last account I got absolutely sealed it for me. I mean, the old guy's account of Flixton Star Car convinced me, but the last account at Spittal Corner just sealed it. This thing I know we're all going to differ on whether it's flesh and blood, whether it's something interdimensional, or whether it's something else altogether. This thing, in whatever shape or form, is real. That's as much as I can say. I'm convinced of it. It's real. And now I'm intrigued. I will dig and I will dig and I will dig. That's the nature of me. And I'll continue to until I've got more answers. I might never get any answers, but it won't stop me looking.
Well, like you said, this thing is real. I don't see how anyone who was in full possession of the facts could deny that. The people that don't accept it as being real are the ones who don't know much at all about it. They've closed their minds off and refuse to even consider the possibilities, so I don't think that could be argued. Having said that, Paul, I want to thank you so much for coming on. Before we get out of here, do you have any closing comments you'd like to share?
I'd just like anybody listening to just take on board what I've said. Don't take anything as sort of fact. Have a look yourself at what I've told you about as regards the refuges, Flixton Star Car, and have a look into it yourself. I mean, it'd be brilliant for other sets of eyes and other minds to look into this ancient story and other ancient stories, because there's probably correlations to lots of stories at your side of the world and in other parts of the world that would help throw light on the Flixton werewolf, or this story can help throw light on other stories. So I think we should all knock our heads together and actually see what we can sort of solve or try and solve. It's the only way we're going to do it. I mean, me looking into all this at this end of the world, there's only so much I can do. Other brains and other minds need to be looking into it.
Well said. I don't think it can be denied that in order to make any kind of headway on this phenomenon, it's going to be a team effort that's going to be required. Well, having said that, Paul, I can't thank you enough for coming back on the show and talking about all these interesting topics. Thanks again so much.
Thank you very much, Vic. It's been an absolute pleasure, as always.
Thanks again, and have a great night.
Right, I wish you well.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye. If you've had a Dogman encounter and you'd like to speak with me about it, whether in private or on the show, you can reach me at contact@dogmanencounters.com. I'd love to hear from you.